In this lesson for Task 3A Monument, I want to look at the bass synth. Now, the bass synth does some really complex processing tasks. It's quite complex to get the actual timbre right, so you're going to have to use kind of all your knowledge to get this one. Now, some of the areas that I want to pull your attention to is filter manipulation, kind of filter sweeps and high-pass filters, and kind of glitch techniques. Now if we look at the score, you're going to see this is written in the bass clef, and that's fine. And throughout the song you've got this kind of octave technique happening, or octave interval happening, pretty much throughout. It kind of jumps between octaves. If we look at this part here, we've got this it's what's called a glitch technique, and now it's written as a 32. So when you're looking at the grid, you are going to have to manipulate the grid to a 32 rather than a 16 to kind of get that, and it's a really nice effect, and I will show you that in just a second on the score, so just be very aware. Now let's have a little look through this. So the bass happens throughout. On the score it's only written once. In order for us to get as close a sound as possible, we've actually doubled up the part. So this is exactly the same part being played on both instruments. But to kind of thicken up the texture and get the texture that we want, we've balanced two synths together. So if we look at this first synth, which we've done on this retro, and if we look at this classic synth, which we've done on the ES2, you'll notice that it's balanced quite low compared to this one, which is our prominent synth. So as we go through, you'll notice you've got this octave interval, and then if we look down here, you'll see that we've got this glitch technique. So if I put my playhead here, in order to kind of get this, and if you're penciling in rather than playing in, which is probably going to be easier, all you would do is change the grid size from 16 to 32. And now you'll see, if you zoom out, you have the appropriate grid size to be able to input that little glitch. And that's lovely. And now they are going to expect to hear that sound, so make sure you do it, and then make sure you change it back to 16s when you're done with inputting all that data. I will share the bulk of these parts. What you're going to find is the intro and verses are fairly similar. I think there may be a couple of changes, but mostly they are the same. The chorus gets a little bit more complex with a couple of changes that happen in both this part, the second part of the chorus, and the end part of the chorus. And then the bridge is also different. So before we move on and kind of delve into the sound that we've got currently, let me just flick over and show you what's happening with some of the frequency manipulation. If I press the A button here, you'll see I go into my automation window. Now what's happened here is we've got a standard bass sound happening all the way through, but you'll notice that there's this bypass that happens right here on this first bass. And this is for, if I open this up, this is for the EQ, bypass 3 and bypass 4. And this is this area here. You'll notice that it's greyed out because at the moment the bypass says, hey, we don't want the EQ to happen until we get here. And if I move my playhead up here, you'll notice that this EQ, these very drastic EQ settings happen. So we've got a complete timbral change at this point. Let me just play that so you can see what happens. And I'll bring it in before the EQ clicks over. It's quite drastic, so you've got this kind of fat sound going into this really thin sound. And then we've got this other one here, we've got a high pass filter. If I just solo this part, so if I select this, you'll notice that my EQ settings down here, we've got this low cut, and that happens all the way through. So the low cut happens at 20 Hertz all the way through, but then once it gets to this point, you'll see that the EQ starts to move. And it starts to get a bit more drastic all the way up to 2 kilohertz. And this kind of just allows for that sound to thin out before the piece stops. Let me just play that as well. This isn't completely right yet. I think we still need to change that a little bit more, but it's heading in the right direction. Now, we haven't done this yet, but I've also heard similar frequency techniques in this area here and earlier on. So you are going to have to use your ear and kind of find those areas where that manipulation happens. For the most part, the score is absolutely accurate, but you are going to have to use your ear, find out where that manipulation happens, because there's a lot of this happening in this part. Like I said before, there's some complex techniques happening here. So that's what I've got so far. Feel free to have a look at that, and I will share those screenshots of my starting point, but do keep in mind that it's just my starting point. So the sound that we've got if I just play it from the beginning, and I'll play their track first, and then we'll just do a compare and contrast. And you can hear that nice little glitch sound happening at the beginning. Now let's play my part. Now you can even hear from that mine's quite clean and theirs is quite grainy, so I'm going to have to kind of make it a bit more grain. I might even put a noise oscillator in there just to grain it up a little bit. Let me play one at a time so you can hear how these two are balanced together now. So there's my clean synth, and here's my distorted synth. Here's them together. Okay, so you can see that's not too bad. It's starting to come on. I'm pretty happy with it. So let's just have a look. The settings that I've got at the moment is it's straight down the center, and as I said before, I am mixing both of these sounds together. So I've got my distorted heavy bass quite low in the mix, and I've got my clean bass a little bit higher. I'm using this exciter effect, which is I think just built into it. We're obviously doing the EQ manipulation. The actual synth that I'm using is this retro. This is new in Logic X. So if you haven't got Logic X, you won't get this, and you'll have to find an appropriate one, probably using the ES2, which is what I've got my distorted synth on. To kind of make this sound a little bit more solid, I have started pulling in some of this envelope to make sure the release doesn't go on for too long, okay? Make sure the decay doesn't go on for too long. And I've done that for both of them, and I'll share the screenshot so you've got that as well. Let me go over to this one. So the ES2 is my really distorted one, and once again I have brought the release down a little bit, and I have brought the decay down a little bit, and I'm going to have to mix these up a little bit. Like I said before, I may have to add a little bit of noise in here just to grain it up just a little bit more, or I may even just put a bit more cut off on just to maybe brighten up the sound a little bit as well. I'll share these. Remember, these are very much the starting points. I'm sure you can do equally as well, and if not better, and just keep moving through that sound and working those out. Some of the ways in which we've achieved this grainy sound then, we've got the Bit Cruncher, which is fantastic, a piece of software or an effect to get a bit of grain out of your sound. We've got this distortion, which is brilliant for tonal qualities. And then once again, we've got this EQ. So that's pretty much all I have to say about that. Start inputting your notes, and I'll see you in the next lesson.